Atomic Habits by James Clear. Full book summary. Imagine you could change your life by just improving a tiny habit every day. How would that impact your health, your career, your relationships? James Clear's Atomic Habits teaches you how the smallest changes can lead to monumental improvements. This book explains how habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. Just 1% better each day adds up to massive gains over time. Chapter 1. The Surprising Power of Atomic Habits. Imagine a powerful ship on a vast ocean. It's not the major course corrections that steer the ship towards its destination, but rather the subtle adjustments made every few minutes that keep it on track. James Clear's Atomic Habits begins with a simple yet mind-blowing revelation. It's not the big, life-changing decisions that determine our success, but the tiny, almost invisible changes we make every single day. These are what Clear refers to as atomic habits, small behaviors that seem insignificant on their own, but when repeated consistently, can lead to monumental changes. We all crave instant results. It's human nature. We're drawn to stories of overnight success, dramatic weight loss transformations, or entrepreneurs who make millions seemingly out of nowhere. But these stories, while captivating, are misleading. Clear challenges this perspective by introducing the concept of the compound effect. Just like compound interest in finance, where small amounts of money grow exponentially over time, habits compound. Clear explains that if you can get just 1% better every day, you'll end up 37 times better by the end of the year. It's a staggering realization. Small, incremental improvements add up to extraordinary results. But here's where the magic happens. The power of atomic habits doesn't just apply to positive behaviors. If you allow yourself to get 1% worse every day, say by skipping the gym today, eating unhealthy tomorrow, or procrastinating on your goals, the negative results compound too. Over time, you'll find yourself much worse off than when you started, even if you didn't notice the change happening. Clear's insight here is profound. We often don't notice the impact of our habits right away. He calls this the plateau of latent potential. You've likely experienced this before. You start working out, eating better, or practicing a skill, and after a few weeks, you look in the mirror or evaluate your progress and feel like nothing has changed. This is where most people give up, frustrated that their hard work hasn't paid off yet. But, Clear argues, this is the most critical point to persist. The results are hiding beneath the surface, like ice slowly melting at a certain temperature. It takes time for habits to compound and reach a tipping point. When that point arrives, the change is dramatic. Clear illustrates this with the story of a British cycling team that, for years, had been among the worst performing teams in the sport. They hired a new coach, Dave Brailsford, who implemented a strategy he called the aggregation of marginal gains. Rather than looking for a single dramatic improvement, Brailsford focused on making tiny improvements in every area of performance, from the design of the bike seats to the type of pillows the cyclists slept on. These improvements, while small, began to compound. In just 5 years, the British cycling team won 60% of the gold medals at the 2008 Olympics and dominated the Tour de France in the years that followed. This, Clear explains, is the power of atomic habits in action. But why is it so hard to recognize the power of these tiny changes? Clear argues that we are wired to seek immediate gratification. We want to see results right away. When the results don't come quickly, we lose motivation. This is why diets fail, why people give up on their New Year's resolutions, and why most self-improvement attempts are abandoned. We're looking for the quick fix, but true, lasting change takes time. To drive this point home, Clear shares his own story. As a high school athlete, he suffered a severe injury that left him in a coma. His recovery was long and grueling, and he had to relearn many basic skills, from walking to lifting weights. But instead of focusing on dramatic transformations, he began focusing on small habits, eating better, exercising a little bit every day, improving his study habits. Over time, these small changes compounded, and he eventually became a successful college baseball player, writer, and speaker. Clear leaves us with an important lesson. We often think that success is the result of one big moment or breakthrough. But the truth is, success is the product of daily habits. These small habits, repeated over time, lead to dramatic outcomes. If you're not where you want to be in life, it's likely because your habits aren't aligned with your goals. But the good news is that small changes, when compounded over time, can completely transform your life. You just have to start small, be patient, and trust the process. Chapter 2. How your habits shape your identity, and vice versa. Picture this. You've been trying to quit smoking, but every time you light a cigarette, you tell yourself, I just need to quit smoking. Or perhaps you've made a New Year's resolution to get fit, and you find yourself saying, I want to be healthier this year. These are common ways we set goals. We focus on the outcome. Quit smoking, get healthier, run a marathon, read more books. But James Clear offers a profound insight. It's not the outcomes that truly change us. It's our identity. In Chapter 2, Clear introduces us to the concept of identity-based habits, and this is a game changer. Most people approach habits by focusing on what they want to achieve, which he calls outcome-based habits. But the secret to real, lasting change is identity-based habits, which focus on who you want to become. Let's think about it this way. Let's say two people are trying to quit smoking. Someone offers both of them a cigarette. The first person says, No thanks, I'm trying to quit. The second person says, No thanks, I'm not a smoker. Notice the difference? The first person still sees themselves as a smoker, someone struggling against their identity. But the second person has taken on a new identity. They don't see themselves as a smoker anymore. This subtle shift in language reveals something powerful. The second person is more likely to succeed because they've aligned their habits with their identity. Clear explains that there are 3 levels of behavior change. The first level is about changing your outcomes. This is where most people start, focusing on the results they want to achieve, such as losing weight or earning more money. The second level is changing your processes, which means altering your habits and systems. This is more effective than just focusing on the outcome, but it's still not the deepest level. The deepest level, and the one where lasting change happens, is changing your identity. Identity-based habits are about focusing on who you wish to become. Instead of setting a goal to read 50 books a year, you shift your focus to becoming the type of person who reads regularly. Instead of setting a goal to run a marathon, you focus on becoming a runner. When you change your identity, the habits that support that identity naturally follow. Here's where things get really interesting. Clear emphasizes that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. Every time you go to the gym, even if it's just for 10 minutes, you're casting a vote for becoming a fit person. Every time you choose a healthy meal over fast food, you're casting a vote for becoming someone who eats well. And the more votes you cast, the stronger that identity becomes. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win every single vote. But the more consistent you are in casting votes for the person you want to be, the more that identity takes hold. This is why small habits are so powerful. They may seem insignificant on their own, but each small action reinforces your new identity. Over time, these actions compound, and your identity shifts. You start to see yourself differently. You're no longer someone who is trying to quit smoking. You're a non-smoker. You're not someone who is trying to get fit. You're a fit person. This is the key to long-lasting habit change. Shifting your identity to align with the person you want to become. Clear shares examples from real life to illustrate this. He tells the story of a man who lost over 100 pounds by focusing on becoming the type of person who didn't miss workouts. Rather than obsessing over the scale or trying to hit specific weight loss goals, he simply committed to showing up at the gym, day after day, week after week. Over time, the weight came off, but more importantly, he became someone who prioritized his health. This approach is liberating because it takes the pressure off of perfection. You don't have to make massive changes overnight. You don't need to transform into a whole new person in a matter of weeks. You just need to start casting small votes for the person you want to become. And with each vote, your identity shifts a little more. But here's the catch. The same principle applies to bad habits. Every time you procrastinate, you're casting a vote for being a procrastinator. Every time you give in to junk food, you're casting a vote for being someone who eats unhealthily. These votes may seem small, but over time, they compound, and your identity solidifies around these habits. Clear reminds us that identity is not fixed. We often think of our identity as something set in stone, but it's actually quite fluid. Your habits are what shape your identity, and your identity, in turn, shapes your habits. It's a two-way street. The key is to consciously choose the identity you want, and then align your habits to support that identity. This brings us to a critical insight. Changing your habits is not about achieving specific outcomes. It's about becoming the type of person who consistently works toward those outcomes. When you focus on your identity, the habits that support that identity become a natural extension of who you are. You no longer have to rely on sheer willpower to force yourself to act a certain way because your actions are aligned with your sense of self. Clear closes this chapter with a powerful message. If you want to change your life, you have to start by changing your identity. And the way to change your identity is by making small, consistent changes in your habits. Every action is a vote for the person you want to become. And over time, those small actions will compound into a new, stronger identity, one that supports the life you truly want to live. Chapter 3. The 4 Laws of Behavior Change. Now that we've uncovered the power of identity-based habits, James Clear takes us deeper into the mechanics of how habits work. In this chapter, he introduces what he calls the 4 Laws of Behavior Change. These laws form the backbone of the entire book. They aren't just theoretical ideas. They're practical tools you can use to build good habits and break bad ones. If identity is the why behind habit formation, the 4 laws are the how. But before we dive into the 4 laws, let's take a step back and ask a fundamental question. What exactly is a habit? Clear defines a habit as a behavior that has been repeated enough times to become automatic. It's something you do almost without thinking. Brushing your teeth, putting on your shoes, checking your phone first thing in the morning. All of these are habits, and whether they're good or bad, they all follow the same process. Clear describes this process as a loop with 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. Think of it like this. The cue is what triggers your brain to initiate a behavior. The craving is the motivation behind the behavior, the desire to change your internal state. The response is the actual action or habit you perform, and the reward is the benefit you get from doing the habit, which reinforces the behavior. To make this clearer, let's walk through an example. Imagine you wake up in the morning and feel groggy. That's your cue. Your brain notices that you're tired and needs something to wake you up. Your craving is to feel more alert. In response, you make a cup of coffee. The reward is that you feel energized and ready to start your day. The next time you wake up groggy, your brain will remember that coffee made you feel better, and you'll be more likely to repeat the behavior. Over time, this loop becomes automatic, and before you know it, drinking coffee in the morning is a habit. But what makes some habits stick while others don't? That's where the 4 laws of behavior change come in. These laws are essentially a framework that makes it easier to understand how habits are formed and how they can be changed. Clear explains that if you want to build a good habit, you need to make it follow these 4 laws. 1. Make it obvious, cue. 2. Make it attractive, craving. 3. Make it easy, response. 4. Make it satisfying, reward. Let's break these down. The first law, make it obvious, is all about the cues that trigger your habits. If you want to change a habit, the first step is to become aware of what cues are triggering it in the first place. For example, if you're trying to reduce screen time, you need to become aware of what prompts you to pick up your phone. Maybe it's boredom or notifications. Once you're aware of the cue, you can manipulate it. Clear suggests something called habit stacking as a way to leverage this principle. Habit stacking means linking a new habit with an existing one so that the cue for the new habit is obvious and automatic. For instance, if you already brush your teeth every morning, an established habit, you could stack a new habit like stretching right after you brush your teeth. This way, brushing your teeth becomes the cue for your new habit of stretching. The second law, make it attractive, focuses on the craving that drives your habit. Clear argues that habits are more likely to stick if they're appealing. Our brain releases dopamine, a feel-good chemical, when we anticipate a reward. The more attractive the habit, the stronger the craving. To make a habit more attractive, Clear suggests using temptation bundling. This means pairing something you need to do, a habit you're trying to form, with something you want to do. For example, if you love watching Netflix but struggle to exercise, you could bundle these two by only allowing yourself to watch your favorite show while you're on the treadmill. The anticipation of watching Netflix makes exercising more attractive. The third law, make it easy, is all about reducing the friction of performing the habit. Clear's point here is simple. The easier a habit is to do, the more likely you are to do it. Many people set themselves up for failure by making habits too difficult. They set goals like, I'm going to run 5 miles every morning, or I'm going to write 2,000 words every day. These goals are admirable, but they're also high friction. They require a lot of effort and motivation to complete, which makes it easy to give up. Instead, Clear advises starting small. Make the habit so easy that you can't say no. If you want to start exercising, don't commit to a 30-minute workout right away. Start with just 2 minutes. Once you've mastered that, you can gradually increase the difficulty. By making the habit easy to begin, you reduce the resistance to doing it. The fourth law, make it satisfying, is the final piece of the puzzle. This law taps into the brain's reward system. Clear explains that we are more likely to repeat a behavior if it's satisfying. The immediate pleasure we feel from completing a habit reinforces the behavior and makes us want to do it again. This is why many people struggle with bad habits. Smoking, for example, offers an immediate sense of relaxation, even if the long-term effects are harmful. On the flip side, good habits often have delayed rewards. Working out today doesn't immediately give you a six-pack, and saving money now doesn't make you rich tomorrow. So how do we make good habits more satisfying? Clear suggests creating a system of immediate rewards. For instance, if you're trying to save money, you could put $1 in a jar every time you resist the urge to make an unnecessary purchase. The satisfaction of watching your savings grow will reinforce the habit. But what about bad habits? Clear explains that breaking bad habits is essentially the reverse of building good ones. Instead of making it obvious, you make it invisible. Remove the cues that trigger the habit. Instead of making it attractive, you make it unattractive. Reframe your mindset so that the bad habit is less appealing. Instead of making it easy, you make it difficult. Add friction to make the bad habit harder to do. And instead of making it satisfying, you make it unsatisfying. Introduce negative consequences or remove rewards associated with the bad habit. The beauty of these 4 laws is that they're practical and actionable. They give you a clear roadmap for creating habits that stick and breaking habits that don't serve you. But, like all powerful tools, they require consistency. The key is to keep showing up day after day, casting those small votes for the person you want to become. Clear ends the chapter by emphasizing that habits are the building blocks of mastery. Whether you want to improve your health, your finances, your relationships, or any other area of life, it all comes down to the tiny daily decisions you make. The 4 laws provide the framework for making sure those decisions lead to lasting, positive change. Chapter 4. The Man Who Didn't Look Right. As we move further into the story of habits, James Clear takes us into a world where seemingly invisible patterns rule our behavior. In this chapter, we are introduced to one of the most crucial steps in habit formation: identifying the cues that initiate our behaviors. Without recognizing the cues, we're like actors stepping onto the stage without knowing what play we're performing. Habits, good or bad, all begin with a cue, and Clear dives deep into why making our cues obvious is the key to creating lasting change. He begins with a powerful story about a woman named Anne who had an extraordinary ability to notice things that others didn't. Anne was a nurse, and her story began when she saw a man walk into a hospital waiting room. To everyone else, he looked perfectly fine. But to Anne, something about him didn't look right. His skin had a slight gray tint, and he was slightly out of breath, but nothing alarming. Yet, she trusted her instincts and immediately took action. Within moments, the man collapsed. It turned out he had a serious heart condition, and her quick decision to act saved his life. What does this story have to do with habits? Anne's ability to notice subtle cues that others didn't is a perfect metaphor for how we need to approach habits. Most of the time, we go through life oblivious to the cues that trigger our behaviors. Our brains are wired to respond to these cues automatically, without us even noticing them. If we can train ourselves to notice the cues that trigger our habits, we gain the power to change them. Clear explains that many of our habits are so deeply ingrained that we don't even realize they're happening. Take, for example, something as simple as checking your phone. You don't even think about it anymore. You just do it. The cue might be as subtle as a moment of boredom, or it could be triggered by seeing your phone screen light up. In either case, the behavior happens almost unconsciously. The first law of behavior change is to make the cues that trigger your habits obvious. But how do we do that? Clear introduces a simple but powerful technique, the habit scorecard. This technique involves listing all of your daily habits, everything from brushing your teeth in the morning to checking your email at work. Once you've listed your habits, you evaluate each one. Is it a good habit, a bad habit, or is it neutral? This process makes you aware of your current habits and helps you recognize the cues that trigger them. Clear emphasizes that most people never take the time to examine their habits closely. They live on autopilot, reacting to their environment without ever really thinking about why they do what they do. By using the habit scorecard, you can take back control. You can identify the behaviors that serve you and the ones that don't. And more importantly, you can pinpoint the cues that trigger those behaviors. But simply being aware of your cues isn't enough. If you want to build new habits, you need to create new cues. One of the best ways to do this, according to Clear, is by using implementation intentions. An implementation intention is a plan that spells out exactly when and where you will perform a specific behavior. Instead of saying, "I'll work out more," you create a clear plan like, "I will go to the gym at 7 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday." This small shift in language makes the cue obvious. Your brain now knows exactly when to initiate the behavior. Clear builds on this by introducing another powerful technique, habit stacking. Habit stacking involves pairing a new habit you want to create with an existing habit you already do consistently. Let's say you want to start meditating every morning, but you struggle to make it a consistent part of your routine. Instead of just hoping you'll remember to meditate, you stack it on top of a habit you already have. For example, if you brush your teeth every morning, an automatic habit, you can stack meditation immediately after brushing your teeth. After I brush my teeth, I will meditate for 5 minutes. This approach uses the existing habit as a cue to trigger the new one. The beauty of habit stacking is that it leverages the power of existing routines to help you build new behaviors. You're not starting from scratch. You're adding on to something that's already automatic. This makes the new habit easier to adopt and more likely to stick. But why is it so important to make cues obvious? Clear explains that our environment plays a massive role in shaping our behavior. We are constantly influenced by our surroundings, even when we don't realize it. If you want to change your behavior, you need to change your environment to make the cues for good habits obvious and the cues for bad habits invisible. For instance, if you want to read more books, make sure there's a book sitting on your nightstand or on the coffee table where you can see it. If you want to stop eating junk food, make sure it's out of sight, preferably not even in the house. By altering your environment, you can change the cues that trigger your habits. If the cue isn't there, the habit won't happen. This is why people who seem to have incredible self-control often don't rely on willpower. They've simply designed their environments to make good behaviors easy and bad behaviors hard. Clear highlights an interesting study from Vietnam in the 1970s. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. government was shocked to find that over 15% of American soldiers stationed in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. However, something remarkable happened when they returned home. 90% of the soldiers who had been addicted stopped using heroin almost immediately. Why? Their environment changed. In Vietnam, the cues for drug use were everywhere. But when the soldiers returned to the US, those cues disappeared. The change in environment led to a dramatic change in behavior. This example underscores the power of making cues obvious or invisible. If you want to build a good habit, you need to make the cues for that habit stand out in your environment. If you want to break a bad habit, you need to remove the cues that trigger it. Clear ends this chapter by reminding us that awareness is the first step to change. You can't change what you're not aware of. By using techniques like the habit scorecard, implementation intentions, and habit stacking, you can start to take control of your habits. You can create a world where the cues for good habits are all around you, and the cues for bad habits have disappeared. In doing so, you make it far easier to build the life you want, one small habit at a time. Chapter 5. The best way to start a new habit. As we venture deeper into the world of habits, James Clear begins to uncover a truth that's both liberating and slightly uncomfortable. Motivation, the thing we so often rely on to change our lives, is overrated. How many times have you told yourself that tomorrow will be different? That tomorrow you'll finally muster the motivation to hit the gym, start writing that book, or eat healthier. Yet, when tomorrow arrives, the motivation fades and old habits win. The good news, Clear tells us, is that motivation isn't the answer. In fact, it never was. In Chapter 5, Clear introduces us to the idea that environment and specific plans, not motivation, are what truly drive behavior. He explains that habits aren't about how motivated or disciplined you are. They're about creating an environment and a plan that makes it easy to follow through regardless of how you feel. This is the key to starting new habits that actually last. Let's break this down with a simple example. Picture two people trying to build the habit of going for a run every morning. The first person, full of enthusiasm, sets their alarm for 6 a.m. and tells themselves, "Tomorrow, I'll wake up early and go for a run." The second person does the same, but they go a step further. The night before, they lay out their running clothes and shoes by the door, fill up their water bottle, and even set their playlist for the run. Both people wake up the next morning tired, but who is more likely to follow through? Of course, the second person. Why? Because they've removed the friction between the desire to run and actually running. This is where Clear's concept of implementation intentions comes into play. We touched on it briefly in the previous chapter, but now we dig deeper. Implementation intentions are all about making a concrete plan for when and where you will perform a habit. It's not enough to say, "I want to start exercising." You need to be specific. I will go for a 30-minute run at 7 a.m. in the park on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The more specific your plan, the less energy your brain has to expend figuring out what to do when the time comes. Instead of relying on motivation to make a decision in the moment, you've already made the decision ahead of time. Research backs this up. Studies have shown that people who make a specific plan of action are far more likely to follow through than those who don't. It's not because they're more disciplined or motivated, but because they've created a structure that guides their behavior. When the time comes, they don't have to think, they just act. But Clear doesn't stop at implementation intentions. He introduces another powerful tool for habit formation: habit stacking. Habit stacking is a technique where you take a habit you're already doing consistently and stack a new habit on top of it. The idea is simple. The existing habit becomes the cue for the new habit, making it much easier to adopt. Let's say you already have a habit of brewing coffee every morning. You want to start a habit of journaling, but you've struggled to find the right time to do it. Instead of trying to carve out a new time in your day, you stack the journaling habit onto your coffee routine. After you brew your coffee, you immediately sit down and journal for 5 minutes. Over time, the act of brewing coffee becomes the trigger for your journaling habit. And before you know it, journaling becomes as automatic as making your morning cup of coffee. Habit stacking works because it ties your new habit to something familiar, something your brain is already doing on autopilot. This reduces the friction of starting a new habit and makes it much easier to stick with. And remember, the key to making this work is to ensure the new habit is small and manageable. You don't want to overwhelm yourself by stacking a habit that's too big. Start small and let the habit grow naturally over time. But how do you ensure that these habits, once started, actually stick? This is where Clear introduces the concept of reducing friction. Friction is anything that makes it harder to perform a habit. The more friction there is, the less likely you are to follow through. If your running shoes are buried in the back of your closet, you're less likely to go for that run. If your gym is a 30-minute drive away, you're less likely to work out regularly. The solution? Make the desired behavior as easy as possible by reducing friction. Let's look at another example. Imagine you want to start reading more books, but you always find yourself scrolling through your phone in bed instead. To reduce friction, you might remove your phone from the bedroom entirely and place a book on your pillow instead. Now, when you go to bed, the book is the first thing you see, and your phone, the source of distraction, is out of reach. You've made the new habit, reading, easier, and the bad habit, scrolling, harder, simply by adjusting your environment. Clear gives plenty of practical advice on how to apply this principle. If you want to eat healthier, make healthy foods visible and convenient. Keep fruits and vegetables at eye level in your fridge, and get rid of the junk food. If you want to start working out regularly, pack your gym bag the night before and place it by the door, so you don't have to scramble for your gear in the morning. The easier you make the habit, the more likely you are to do it. But reducing friction isn't just about making good habits easier. It's also about making bad habits harder. If you're trying to cut back on social media, you could increase the friction by deleting the apps from your phone or turning off notifications. If you're trying to stop watching TV late into the night, unplug the TV and put the remote in a drawer. The more steps you have to take to perform a bad habit, the less likely you are to do it. This idea of reducing friction leads into a powerful realization. Motivation is fleeting, but systems endure. You can't rely on motivation to show up every day. Some days, you'll be tired, stressed, or just plain unmotivated. But if you've designed a system that makes it easy to follow through, you won't need motivation. You'll just follow the plan you've already set in motion. Clear's message is simple but profound. Don't wait for motivation to strike. Don't hope that tomorrow you'll wake up feeling inspired to change your life. Instead, take control by designing your environment and creating specific plans that make it easy to follow through, even when you don't feel like it. By doing so, you set yourself up for success, one small habit at a time. He ends the chapter by emphasizing that habits don't need to be overwhelming. You don't need to overhaul your life in one dramatic sweep. Start with one small habit, make it easy, and build from there. Over time, these small habits compound into significant change, and before you know it, you've become the person you set out to be, not because of a burst of motivation, but because you created a system that supported your growth. Chapter 6. Motivation is overrated. Environment often matters more. As we continue our journey through Atomic Habits, James Clear presents one of the most surprising and liberating truths about habits. Motivation is not the key to lasting change. You see, for most of our lives, we've been told that motivation and willpower are the driving forces behind achieving our goals. We believe that if we just try hard enough, if we just push ourselves a little more, we'll finally break through. But here's the problem. Motivation is like a fickle friend. Some days it's there, cheering us on, and other days it vanishes without a trace. This chapter invites us to shift our thinking. It isn't about mustering endless motivation or summoning iron willpower. Instead, Clear shows us that our environment, the physical spaces around us, often has a more profound impact on our behavior than we realize. If you've ever walked into a messy kitchen and felt instantly overwhelmed by the sight of dirty dishes, or been distracted by your phone the moment you sat down to work, you've experienced how your environment can subtly shape your actions. Clear starts by explaining a fundamental truth. We are all a product of our environment. Whether we realize it or not, our surroundings nudge us in particular directions. They provide cues that prompt our habits, both good and bad. Want to eat healthier? It's much harder if your kitchen is full of junk food. Want to be more productive? It's nearly impossible when your workspace is cluttered and chaotic. The key, Clear says, is to design your environment so it encourages good habits and discourages bad ones. Let's think of a simple example. Imagine you're trying to reduce the amount of TV you watch. You know that lounging on the couch with the remote in hand often leads to hours of mindless binge watching, but every evening after a long day, you find yourself doing just that. So what can you do? Clear suggests increasing the friction of your bad habit. You could unplug the TV after each use, place the remote in a drawer across the room, or even put the TV in a less accessible place in your home. These small changes may sound insignificant, but they introduce just enough friction to make you stop and think, do I really want to go through all that effort just to watch TV? More often than not, you'll find yourself skipping it altogether. On the flip side, you can reduce friction for good habits by making them more accessible and obvious. If you want to read more, place a book in a visible, convenient spot, perhaps on your nightstand or next to your favorite chair. Want to drink more water? Keep a water bottle on your desk within arm's reach so you're constantly reminded to hydrate. By removing obstacles and making it easier to engage in good habits, you're setting yourself up for success without relying on motivation. Clear gives the example of a study conducted in a hospital where researchers wanted to increase water consumption among visitors. Instead of launching a campaign to encourage people to drink more water, they made a simple change. They rearranged the refrigerators so that bottled water was placed at eye level while sugary drinks were moved to less visible areas. The result? Water sales skyrocketed. People didn't need more motivation to choose water over soda. They just needed the healthier option to be easier to see and access. But here's where Clear takes this idea further. It's not just about making good habits more visible and bad habits less obvious. He also introduces the concept of environment design, where you actively shape your surroundings to align with the habits you want to build. Think of your environment as a set of cues, constantly signaling to your brain what to do next. If those cues are working for you, your habits will naturally follow. If they're working against you, it'll feel like you're constantly swimming upstream. Clear gives us a fascinating glimpse into how environment design can work wonders in everyday life. He talks about a company called Fog Creek Software, where the leadership team wanted to create a culture that promoted deep, focused work. Rather than relying on motivational posters or pep talks, they designed an office environment that eliminated distractions. Each programmer had their own private office with a door that could be closed. There were no shared desks or open floor plans. By designing an environment that made it easy to concentrate, they created a culture of productivity without needing to constantly push employees to stay focused. This idea of environment design can be applied to nearly any goal or habit. Want to stop mindlessly snacking while you work? Keep your workspace free from snacks. Or better yet, only allow yourself to eat in the kitchen. Want to be more consistent with your workouts? Lay out your workout clothes the night before and keep your gym bag by the door, so it's the first thing you see in the morning. Small changes in your environment can lead to massive changes in your behavior. Clear also emphasizes that environment design isn't just about physical spaces. It includes your social environment as well. The people we surround ourselves with have a huge influence on our habits, often more than we realize. Think about it. If your closest friends are all fitness enthusiasts, you're far more likely to adopt healthy habits simply because those behaviors are normalized within your social circle. On the other hand, if your friends spend their weekends indulging in junk food and skipping workouts, it becomes much harder to maintain a healthy lifestyle. Your social environment can either pull you toward your goals or push you further away from them. Clear shares a powerful example of how our social environment shapes us. He recounts a story about a man who moved to a new neighborhood where fitness was a big part of the community's culture. His neighbors regularly went for runs, attended fitness classes, and participated in local races. Even though he hadn't been much of a runner before, he found himself lacing up his shoes and joining them on morning jogs. He didn't suddenly become more motivated or disciplined. Instead, his environment, both physical and social, was designed in a way that made fitness the obvious choice. This leads to a critical insight. If you want to adopt a new habit, find a community where that behavior is the norm. We are social creatures, wired to follow the cues and behaviors of those around us. When you're surrounded by people who share the same goals and values, it becomes much easier to stay consistent, Whether it's joining a fitness group, attending a writing class, or surrounding yourself with friends who are financially responsible, your social environment can act as a powerful support system for your habits. Clear closes this chapter with a compelling message. Don't fight your environment. Shape it. Instead of relying on motivation to resist temptations, redesign your spaces so that good habits become the path of least resistance. Make the things you want to do obvious, easy, and satisfying, and make the things you want to avoid invisible and difficult. By doing this, you'll transform your environment from a force that works against you to a powerful ally in building the habits that will change your life. Chapter 7. The Secret to Self-Control. As we venture further into the world of habits, James Clear introduces one of the most liberating truths about behavior change. The people who seem to have the best self-control aren't necessarily more disciplined or stronger-willed than the rest of us. Instead, they've simply learned a secret. They design their environment in a way that makes self-control almost unnecessary. If you've ever marveled at someone who seems to effortlessly avoid temptations, like the friend who never eats junk food or the coworker who always stays focused on a task, you might assume they possess some extraordinary level of self-control. But Clear's research shows that's not entirely true. The secret to their success isn't that they're better at resisting temptation, but that they've structured their lives in a way where they don't have to. This chapter begins by acknowledging a universal truth. Self-control is a limited resource. No matter how strong your willpower is, it's finite. Throughout the day, as you make decision after decision, your willpower depletes. By the time the evening rolls around, it's much harder to resist temptations like eating unhealthy snacks or scrolling through social media instead of working. This is what researchers call decision fatigue, the idea that the more decisions we make, the worse our decision-making ability becomes. Think about it. Have you ever found yourself making poor choices at the end of a long day? Maybe you stuck to your diet all day, but by the time you get home, you're too tired to cook, so you order takeout. Or maybe you plan to work on a side project in the evening, but after a day of meetings and to-do lists, you end up binge-watching Netflix instead. This isn't a failure of self-control. It's the natural result of decision fatigue. Clear's insight is that the people who seem to have iron willpower are not relying on self-control as much as it appears. They simply avoid putting themselves in situations where their self-control will be tested. They've set up their environments and routines in a way that minimizes temptations and makes the good behaviors easier. For them, avoiding junk food isn't a daily battle of willpower. It's simply not in the house to begin with. Staying focused at work isn't about constant discipline. It's about removing distractions from their workspace. Let's dive into a practical example. Imagine you're trying to reduce your screen time. You know that whenever your phone is within reach, you instinctively grab it and start scrolling, even when you had no intention of doing so. The more times you have to resist the temptation to check your phone, the more drained your willpower becomes. By the end of the day, it's nearly impossible to resist. So what's the solution? Clear suggests making the temptation invisible. Instead of leaving your phone on the desk where it constantly tempts you, put it in another room, or better yet, turn it off completely. When the cue, your phone, is out of sight, you're far less likely to engage in the behavior, mindless scrolling. This simple environmental tweak removes the need for self-control altogether. Clear tells us that the key to reducing bad habits isn't to become more disciplined, but to remove the cues that trigger those habits. If you struggle with eating junk food, don't stock your pantry with chips and cookies. If you want to stop watching TV late into the night, unplug the TV and store the remote in a drawer. If you want to focus more on reading, put your phone on airplane mode or in another room when it's time to read. By eliminating the cues that trigger your bad habits, you can significantly reduce the need for willpower. But what about good habits? How do we apply this principle in a positive way? Clear suggests making the cues for good habits as obvious and visible as possible. If you want to start exercising more often, lay out your workout clothes the night before and place them where you'll see them first thing in the morning. If you want to practice a musical instrument more regularly, leave the instrument out in a prominent spot, not hidden away in a closet. The easier it is to see the cue, the easier it becomes to perform the habit without relying on motivation or willpower. Clear offers another profound insight in this chapter. We often overestimate our ability to resist temptation. We think we'll be able to resist that extra cookie, that one more episode, or that scroll through social media. But as we've learned, self-control is a limited resource, and if you keep putting yourself in tempting situations, eventually, you'll give in. The best strategy is not to test your self-control at all. Instead, structure your environment so that the temptations are minimized and the good behaviors become the path of least resistance. To illustrate this point, Clear shares the story of a man named Ronan Byrne, who wanted to watch more Netflix but also knew he needed to work out more. Instead of relying on self-control to force himself to choose exercise over Netflix, he combined the two. He rigged his stationary bike so that it would only power his TV if he was pedaling. No pedaling, no Netflix. Byrne didn't have to rely on willpower to work out. He just had to design his environment in a way that made exercising the default option. This concept of environment design is at the heart of this chapter. It's about recognizing that we are not at the mercy of our willpower. We can control the cues that surround us and shape our behavior. If you're constantly surrounded by temptations, you'll eventually give in, no matter how disciplined you are. But if you can control your environment, if you can remove the cues that lead to bad habits and increase the cues for good ones, you'll find that self-control becomes almost irrelevant. Clear also introduces the idea of reframing cravings. Often, bad habits are driven by immediate rewards. Junk food tastes good right now. Watching TV is relaxing right now. Checking social media is stimulating right now. These immediate rewards make it difficult to resist the craving, even though we know the long-term consequences are negative. Clear suggests reframing how we think about cravings. Instead of focusing on the immediate pleasure, think about the long-term benefits of resisting the bad habit or the long-term rewards of performing the good one. For example, let's say you're trying to stop eating fast food. Every time you pass by your favorite fast food restaurant, your brain craves the immediate reward of a tasty meal. But instead of giving in, you can reframe the craving by reminding yourself of the long-term benefits of healthy eating. More energy, better health, weight loss. The key is to associate the craving with the long-term consequences, not the immediate reward. This shift in mindset makes it easier to resist the temptation because you're no longer focused solely on the short-term pleasure. As the chapter comes to a close, Clear leaves us with a powerful reminder. The people who have the best self-control are the ones who need it the least. They don't spend their days fighting temptations or relying on willpower. Instead, they design their lives in a way that minimizes temptations and makes good habits easy to follow. By controlling the cues in their environment and reframing their cravings, they've set themselves up for success without having to constantly rely on self-control. Chapter 8: How to Make a Habit Irresistible. Imagine for a moment that you're trying to build a new habit, let's say going to the gym regularly. You know it's good for you, you know the long-term benefits, but every time the alarm goes off at 6 a.m., there's a part of you that just doesn't want to get out of bed. The warmth of the covers feels too good, and the thought of lifting weights or running on a treadmill just doesn't seem all that exciting. This is where James Clear steps in with a fascinating idea. If you want to stick to a habit, you need to make it irresistible. In this chapter, Clear digs deep into the second law of behavior change: make it attractive. To understand why this is so important, we need to take a look at how our brains are wired. Clear explains that our brains are driven by the anticipation of rewards. It's not just the reward itself that makes a habit stick. It's the craving for that reward. The more appealing and enjoyable a habit feels, the more our brain craves it. This craving is what drives our behavior. But here's the tricky part. Bad habits, like eating junk food or binge-watching TV, often come with immediate rewards, making them much more attractive in the moment. Good habits, like exercising or working on a side project, tend to have delayed rewards, which makes them harder to stick to. So how do we make good habits more appealing? Clear introduces a concept called temptation bundling. This strategy involves pairing a habit you need to do with something you want to do. Essentially, You're bundling something that's less attractive, like exercising or cleaning, with something that's highly appealing, like watching your favorite show or listening to a podcast. By doing this, you're training your brain to associate the good habit with a sense of reward, making it more attractive over time. Let's say you love watching Netflix but struggle to stay consistent with your workouts. You could create a rule for yourself. You're only allowed to watch Netflix while you're on the treadmill or stationary bike. Now suddenly, the act of exercising has a built-in reward. You get to watch your favorite shows while you do it. Over time, this creates a positive association between working out and entertainment, making the habit feel less like a chore and more like something you look forward to. This idea of linking a habit to something pleasurable taps into our brain's reward system, and Clear explains why this is so effective. Our brains are constantly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It's a survival mechanism that's been hardwired into us for thousands of years. The anticipation of a reward, whether it's food, entertainment, or social interaction, releases a neurotransmitter called dopamine. This is the feel-good chemical that drives our motivation. What's fascinating is that dopamine is released not only when we get the reward, but also when we anticipate it. This is why craving plays such a powerful role in habit formation. If we can trigger that craving for a good habit by pairing it with something pleasurable, we're far more likely to stick with it. Clear shares an example from his own life. He found himself struggling to stay consistent with working out, especially when it involved weightlifting, something he knew was good for him, but didn't particularly enjoy. So he used temptation bundling to change his relationship with the habit. He created a rule for himself. He could only listen to his favorite podcasts or audiobooks while at the gym. Since he loved podcasts, this made the gym more appealing. Suddenly, working out wasn't just about lifting weights. It was an opportunity to indulge in something he genuinely enjoyed. Over time, his craving for the podcast became linked to his workouts, and going to the gym became much more enticing. Clear's message here is powerful. If you can make your habits more attractive by bundling them with something you already love, you'll create a positive feedback loop that reinforces the behavior. The key is to find a way to inject immediate pleasure into the habit, even if the long-term rewards are delayed. But there's more to making a habit irresistible than just bundling it with a reward. Clear also talks about the importance of social reinforcement. Humans are social creatures, and much of our behavior is influenced by the people around us. We want to fit in, to be accepted, and to be seen as part of a group. Clear argues that we're more likely to adopt habits that are praised or accepted by our social circle. If you're surrounded by people who value health and fitness, you're far more likely to start exercising regularly because it's the norm in your social group. On the flip side, if you're surrounded by people who spend their weekends eating junk food and skipping workouts, it becomes harder to build healthy habits because you feel like an outsider. Clear tells the story of a man named Brian who struggled to stay consistent with his diet and exercise routine. But when Brian moved to a new city and joined a local running club, everything changed. The members of the club weren't just avid runners. They had created a community that celebrated and encouraged fitness. Every week they would go for runs together, share tips on nutrition, and cheer each other on. Brian found himself drawn into this culture of health, and over time, he adopted the group's habits as his own. Running became something he looked forward to because it wasn't just about exercise. It was about being part of a community. The positive reinforcement from the group made the habit more enjoyable and more attractive. This highlights a crucial point. If you want to make a habit irresistible, surround yourself with people who embody the behavior you want to adopt. When you see others doing something consistently, it normalizes the behavior and makes it more appealing. If you want to start reading more, join a book club. If you want to eat healthier, spend more time with people who prioritize nutrition. By immersing yourself in a social environment where your desired habit is the norm, you'll find yourself naturally adopting the behavior without needing as much internal motivation. Clear also touches on the importance of ritualizing your habits. Rituals add an element of enjoyment and anticipation to a habit, making it more attractive. Let's say you want to start journaling every morning, but you struggle to make it a consistent part of your routine. Clear suggests creating a ritual around the habit to make it more enjoyable. You could brew your favorite cup of coffee, sit by a sunny window, and light a candle before you start journaling. These small actions create a sense of pleasure and calm around the habit, making it something you look forward to rather than something you have to force yourself to do. The ritual transforms the habit into a mini experience, one that feels satisfying in the moment. This is a powerful insight. Habits that feel good in the moment are more likely to stick. If you can inject moments of pleasure, ritual, and social reinforcement into your habits, they become much easier to maintain. You're no longer relying on willpower to push through discomfort. You're actively creating an environment where the habit feels rewarding right now, not just in the distant future. Clear closes the chapter by reminding us that the key to lasting behavior change isn't just about doing the right things. It's about enjoying the process. When you make your habits attractive, you create a positive cycle of behavior that reinforces itself. Over time, the craving for the habit builds, and it becomes something you look forward to rather than something you dread. Chapter 9. The role of family and friends in shaping your habits. James Clear begins this chapter with a profound realization that may strike a chord with all of us. You are the average of the people you spend the most time with. It's a simple yet powerful truth. Our behaviors, habits, and even the way we think are heavily influenced by those around us. If you've ever found yourself eating more when out with friends, or picking up a new hobby because someone close to you enjoys it, you've experienced this phenomenon firsthand. In Chapter 9, Clear explores how our social circles, family, friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances, play a critical role in shaping our habits. Humans are social creatures. From an evolutionary standpoint, we've always thrived in groups because cooperation and conformity helped ensure survival. Even today, we are wired to mimic the behaviors of the people around us. It's why you might unconsciously start using the same phrases as your friends, or why you feel drawn to activities that your social circle endorses. Clear emphasizes that this natural tendency to imitate the behavior of others can be both a blessing and a curse, depending on the habits that are prevalent in your environment. Let's take a closer look at why this happens. Clear explains that humans have a deep-seated desire to belong. This desire for social approval influences our actions more than we realize. Think back to your childhood or teenage years. Remember how important it was to fit in, to be liked, to be accepted by your peers. That need doesn't go away as we grow older. It just becomes more subtle. We might not always consciously acknowledge it, but our habits are often shaped by the people we want to fit in with. Clear tells the story of a young man named Tom, who, despite struggling with his weight for years, never managed to build a consistent exercise habit. He had tried countless diets and workout programs, but always fell off the wagon after a few weeks. But then, something changed. Tom joined a new job where many of his colleagues were avid runners. They talked about their weekend runs, invited him to participate in 5K races, and shared tips on training and nutrition. Over time, Tom began to feel the subtle pressure to join in. He didn't want to be the odd one out, so he bought a pair of running shoes and started jogging with his coworkers. Before long, running became a regular part of his life. Not because he suddenly became more disciplined, but because his social environment had shifted. The behavior that had once felt difficult and foreign now felt natural, because it was normalized by his peers. Clear argues that we are more likely to adopt habits that align with the culture of our group. If the people around you value health and fitness, you're more likely to pick up those habits. If your social circle prioritizes productivity and self-improvement, you'll feel drawn to those behaviors. But the reverse is also true. If your friends and family spend their weekends drinking, eating unhealthy foods, or avoiding exercise, it becomes much harder to stick to good habits, even if you want to. This is why the social environment you choose to surround yourself with can make or break your habits. Clear suggests that one of the most powerful strategies for changing your behavior is to join a group where your desired behavior is the norm. When you're surrounded by people who already exhibit the habits you want to develop, those behaviors become easier to adopt. You no longer feel like you're going against the grain. Instead, you're simply following the path that's already been laid out by your social circle. Take, for example, someone who wants to quit smoking. It's one thing to make a personal commitment to stop smoking, but it's another to join a support group where everyone else is trying to quit too. The group reinforces the desired behavior, and the social pressure to conform works in your favor. You no longer have to rely solely on your own willpower because the group's collective effort supports you. Clear also emphasizes the power of imitation. We tend to mimic the habits of three social groups: the close, family and friends; the many, the tribe; and the powerful, those we admire or aspire to be like. Let's break this down. First, the habits of our close relationships, our family, friends, and partners, have the most immediate impact on us. If your spouse always has a bowl of ice cream before bed, it's going to be much harder for you to stick to a healthy eating plan. If your best friend spends hours scrolling through social media, you might find yourself doing the same when you're with them. On the flip side, if the people closest to you prioritize exercise, productivity, or mindfulness, you're more likely to follow suit. Second, we're influenced by the tribe, the larger social group or community we identify with. This might be your colleagues at work, a group of friends who share a hobby, or even a social media community. The behavior of the tribe sets the standards for what is normal. If your workplace culture values long hours and constant hustle, you might find yourself working late even if you don't really want to, simply because that's what everyone else is doing. But if you work in an environment that values work-life balance, you'll feel more comfortable leaving the office on time and taking time for self-care. Finally, we are influenced by the powerful, those we look up to, whether they're mentors, public figures, or even celebrities. When we admire someone, we tend to imitate their behavior, often unconsciously. This is why influencer culture has become so powerful in shaping habits. If you follow fitness influencers on Instagram who consistently promote healthy habits, you're more likely to adopt those behaviors because you aspire to be like them. Clear's insight here is profound. If you want to build better habits, start by surrounding yourself with people who exhibit those habits. It's much easier to stay consistent when your desired behavior is the norm in your social environment. You no longer feel like you're swimming against the tide because the people around you are reinforcing the habits you want to develop. But what if your current social circle doesn't support your desired habits? What if your family or friends are stuck in bad habits that you're trying to break free from? Clear acknowledges that this is one of the toughest challenges in habit change. It's hard to stick to a new behavior when the people around you are pulling you in the opposite direction. But he offers a solution. Find a second community that supports your new habits, even if your primary social group doesn't. Let's say your family loves watching TV for hours every evening, but you want to start reading more books. Rather than trying to change their behavior or isolate yourself, you could join a local book club or an online reading group. This second community provides the social reinforcement you need to stick to your new habit. Even if your family isn't on board, you still have a tribe that supports your goals. Clear shares a fascinating example of this from his own life. He recounts how, when he first started writing, many of his friends and family didn't understand why he was dedicating so much time to his blog. They weren't opposed to his writing, but they didn't share his enthusiasm. So, Clear found a second community, other writers and bloggers who understood the challenges he was facing and provided the support and encouragement he needed to keep going. This secondary social group played a crucial role in helping him build the habit of writing consistently, even when his primary social circle wasn't fully aligned with his goals. The lesson here is simple but profound. If you can't change the people around you, change the people you spend the most time with. Seek out communities, clubs, or online groups that align with the habits you want to build. By immersing yourself in a social environment where your desired behavior is the norm, you increase your chances of sticking with it. Clear closes the chapter with a powerful insight. We are social animals, and our habits are often a reflection of the people we spend the most time with. If you want to change your habits, one of the best things you can do is change your environment, not just physically, but socially. Surround yourself with people who support your goals, and you'll find that building new habits becomes easier and more enjoyable. Chapter 10. How to find and fix the causes of your bad habits. James Clear begins this chapter with a universal truth. Bad habits often stick around because they serve a purpose, even if that purpose is not immediately obvious. You might wonder why you can't shake that bad habit of scrolling through social media late into the night, or why you always find yourself reaching for a snack, even when you're not hungry. The answer lies not in a lack of willpower or discipline, but in understanding the deeper reasons why these habits exist in the first place. In this chapter, Clear shows us how to diagnose and fix bad habits by uncovering the cravings that drive them. We've already learned about the habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward. Every habit, good or bad, follows this structure. But here's the catch. Bad habits persist because they provide some kind of reward, even if that reward is short-term or ultimately harmful. Your brain is hardwired to seek out rewards, and once it finds something that satisfies a craving, it will keep repeating the behavior, even if the long-term consequences are negative. Clear encourages us to ask a critical question. What is the real reward behind my bad habit? For example, imagine you have a habit of checking your phone every few minutes, even when you know it's a distraction. On the surface, it might seem like you're simply looking for entertainment or information, but the deeper reward could be something more emotional, like the craving for connection, novelty, or a break from boredom. The habit itself may be destructive, endless scrolling that eats away at your productivity, but the underlying craving it satisfies, stimulation or social connection, keeps it alive. Clear's key insight here is that you don't eliminate bad habits by merely removing them. You replace them by satisfying the craving in a healthier way. If you can identify the root cause of your bad habit, you can find alternative behaviors that provide the same reward without the negative consequences. This is the essence of habit transformation. It's not about fighting against your cravings, but rather finding a better way to meet them. Let's break this down with an example. Say you have a habit of stress eating. Every time you feel anxious or overwhelmed, you find yourself reaching for junk food. The habit may be harming your health, but it persists because it's offering you a temporary sense of relief or comfort. The problem isn't the food itself, it's the craving for comfort or emotional release that the food satisfies. Simply telling yourself to stop eating junk food won't work because it doesn't address the root of the behavior. Instead, you need to find healthier ways to manage stress that still provide the emotional release you crave. This could mean going for a walk, practicing deep breathing exercises, or talking to a friend. The goal is to swap the unhealthy habit for a positive one that satisfies the same underlying craving. Clear also introduces the idea of reframing your mind's relationship with cravings. Often we view cravings as the enemy, something we need to suppress or fight against. But cravings aren't inherently bad. They are signals from your brain that something is missing, whether it's physical, like hunger, or emotional, like stress or boredom. Rather than resisting your cravings, Clear suggests examining them with curiosity. Ask yourself, what is my brain really craving right now? Is it connection, relief from stress, stimulation? Once you understand the craving, you can work on finding a healthier way to satisfy it. One of the most common misconceptions about bad habits is that they're purely the result of laziness or lack of discipline. Clear dispels this myth by showing us that bad habits are often the path of least resistance. Our brains are wired to conserve energy and minimize effort. That's why, when given a choice, we often default to behaviors that are easy and familiar, even if they're harmful in the long run. Bad habits stick because they are, quite literally, easier to perform than good habits. So how do you break the cycle of bad habits when they feel so ingrained? Clear gives us a practical, actionable strategy. Increase the friction of your bad habits and reduce the friction of your good ones. Friction in this sense refers to anything that makes a behavior harder or more inconvenient to perform. If you make a bad habit more difficult, you create a barrier that disrupts the automatic nature of the behavior. For example, let's say you want to stop watching so much TV. One way to increase the friction of this habit is to make it harder to access your TV. You could unplug it after each use, remove the batteries from the remote, or even place the remote in another room. These small inconveniences force you to make a conscious decision before engaging in the habit, rather than mindlessly falling into it. Over time, the added friction can weaken the habit and reduce its appeal. On the flip side, you can reduce the friction for good habits by making them easier to do. If you want to start eating healthier, you could prepare your meals in advance, keep fruits and vegetables within easy reach, and remove unhealthy snacks from your kitchen. The goal is to make the good habit so easy that it requires almost no effort to follow through. Clear highlights a fascinating study that demonstrates this principle in action. Researchers wanted to increase the consumption of healthy foods in a school cafeteria. Rather than lecturing students about nutrition, they made one simple change. They placed the fruit at the front of the food line, where it was easily accessible, while less healthy options were placed further back. The result? Fruit consumption increased dramatically, not because the students were suddenly more motivated to eat healthily, but because the healthier option was the path of least resistance. This is the power of reducing friction for good habits. Clear also emphasizes the importance of inverting the 4 laws of behavior change when it comes to breaking bad habits. If you want to stop a bad habit, you need to reverse the principles we've been learning about building good ones. Here's how it works. 1. Make the cue invisible. If you want to stop smoking, avoid places or situations where you're likely to encounter cues that trigger the habit, like being around other smokers or keeping cigarettes in your house. 2. Make the craving unattractive. Reframe your mindset to focus on the negative aspects of the habit. For instance, if you're trying to cut back on alcohol, focus on the hangover, the sluggish feeling the next day, or the long-term health consequences. By associating the habit with something negative, you reduce the craving for it. 3. Make the response difficult. Add friction to the habit so that it's harder to perform. If you want to stop playing video games late into the night, you could disconnect the console or store it in a hard-to-reach place when you're not using it. 4. Make the reward unsatisfying. Introduce consequences for engaging in the bad habit. For example, you could set up a system where every time you indulge in the bad habit, you have to donate to a cause you dislike. This creates an immediate negative consequence that makes the habit less satisfying. One of the most insightful points Clear makes in this chapter is that habits are not destiny. They are a learned behavior, and what is learned can be unlearned. By identifying the cues and cravings behind your bad habits and by adding friction to disrupt the automatic habit loop, you can take control of your behavior. Bad habits don't have to be a life sentence. They can be reshaped and replaced with positive, life-affirming behaviors. As we come to the end of the chapter, Clear reminds us that breaking bad habits is less about fighting temptation and more about understanding it. When you take the time to examine the underlying cravings that drive your bad habits, you can start to design a life where those cravings are satisfied in healthier, more productive ways. Rather than struggling against your own nature, you learn to work with it, using your brain's natural craving for rewards to your advantage. Chapter 11. Walk slowly, but never backward. At this point in Atomic Habits, James Clear shifts the focus to something that often trips people up when they embark on a journey of habit change: the impatience that creeps in when progress seems slow or non-existent. We live in a world that celebrates instant gratification, where success stories are often told as overnight transformations. But Clear's message in this chapter is clear. Real change, the kind that lasts, happens slowly and steadily. He reminds us that in the game of habit building, it's not about how fast you move. It's about making sure you don't move backward. Imagine planting a seed. You water it diligently, make sure it gets enough sunlight, and care for it each day. For weeks, nothing seems to happen. You start to wonder if something's wrong, if maybe the seed wasn't good, or if you're doing something wrong. But under the surface, things are happening that you can't see. Roots are spreading, and the seed is preparing for growth. One day, after what feels like an eternity, a small green sprout breaks through the soil. This is how habits work. Much of the progress you make in the early days of habit formation is invisible. It's happening beneath the surface, in your brain, and in the slow reshaping of your identity. Clear introduces the concept of the plateau of latent potential to explain why we often give up too soon. When we start a new habit, we expect to see immediate results. We think that if we put in the effort today, we should see progress tomorrow. But the reality is that improvement is not linear. There are often long stretches where it feels like nothing is happening, where the effort we put in doesn't seem to match the results we're getting. This is the plateau of latent potential, the frustrating period where growth is happening, but it's not yet visible. This is the point where many people give up, thinking their efforts are in vain. Clear illustrates this with a powerful example. Imagine you're in a cold room and there's an ice cube sitting on the table. The room is slowly warming up, going from 25 degrees off to 26 degrees off, then to 27 degrees and so on. Even as the temperature rises, the ice cube doesn't change. But then, at 32 degrees, something magical happens. The ice starts to melt. The small, steady increases in temperature finally lead to a visible change. The same thing happens with our habits. For days, weeks, or even months, it may feel like nothing is changing. But one day, seemingly out of nowhere, you start to see the results of your efforts. This is the moment when the ice melts, the point where your hard work pays off and your progress becomes visible. Clear's message here is simple. Don't give up during the plateau of latent potential. The results will come if you stick with it long enough. The key is to keep showing up, even when it feels like you're not making any progress. Consistency is the secret ingredient to habit mastery. This chapter is also a reminder that habits are like compound interest. The effects of your habits multiply over time, much like how a small amount of money invested today can grow into a fortune over the years through the power of compound interest. The small daily actions you take may not seem like much, but they add up. The problem is that we often expect to see exponential growth immediately. But just as with compound interest, the real magic happens after time has passed. Clear tells us that the greatest rewards come from delayed gratification, from being willing to put in the effort today without expecting an immediate payoff. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to build new habits is expecting fast results. Whether it's trying to lose weight, improve their finances, or learn a new skill, many people give up after a few weeks because they don't see the results they hoped for. Clear argues that this mindset is flawed because it's based on the assumption that progress should be fast and obvious. In reality, the most successful people are those who are willing to stay the course, even when progress seems slow. They trust that the work they're putting in will eventually pay off, even if they don't see immediate results. This is why consistency is more important than intensity when it comes to building habits. Clear points out that it's better to do something small consistently than to do something big occasionally. Let's say you want to get in shape. You could go to the gym for 2 hours once a week, or you could go for 20 minutes every day. Which approach is more effective? The answer is the latter. Small, consistent actions compound over time and lead to greater results than sporadic bursts of effort. The key is to keep the habit manageable so that it's sustainable over the long term. Clear explains that part of the reason consistency is so powerful is because it helps you build trust in yourself. Every time you follow through on a habit, no matter how small, you're casting a vote for the type of person you want to become. You're proving to yourself that you're the kind of person who shows up and puts in the work, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it. Over time, this builds a sense of identity that reinforces the habit. You're no longer someone who's trying to exercise. You're someone who exercises. You're no longer someone who's trying to write. You're a writer. This identity shift is crucial because it makes the habit feel natural, like a part of who you are, rather than something you have to force yourself to do. But what about those inevitable moments when you falter? What happens when you miss a day, or even a week, of your new habit? Clear offers a simple yet profound piece of advice. Never miss twice. Everyone slips up from time to time. Life gets in the way, or motivation dips. The important thing is not to let one missed day turn into a pattern. If you miss a day of your habit, don't beat yourself up. Instead, focus on getting back on track as quickly as possible. Missing once is an accident. Missing twice is the start of a new habit, the habit of not doing the thing you've committed to. Clear gives the example of a professional baseball player who had a rule for himself. After every game, no matter how tired he would always do one small thing to improve. It didn't matter if it was something as simple as stretching or reviewing game footage for 5 minutes. The point was to maintain consistency, to prove to himself that he was always moving forward, even in small ways. This mentality helped him avoid long periods of stagnation or regression because he never allowed himself to go too long without making progress. This ties into another important principle: the difference between being in motion and taking action. Clear explains that being in motion often feels productive, but it doesn't always lead to results. For example, planning your workout routine or researching healthy recipes feels like you're making progress, but unless you actually go to the gym or cook a healthy meal, you're not taking action. It's easy to get stuck in motion, thinking you're moving forward when, in reality, you're just preparing to act. True progress comes from action, from showing up and doing the work, even if it's imperfect. Clear reminds us that the path to mastery is not a straight line. There will be ups and downs, moments of rapid progress followed by plateaus. The key is to keep moving forward, no matter how slowly. As long as you're not moving backward, you're still making progress. He encourages us to focus on building systems rather than goals. Goals are about achieving a specific outcome, like losing 10 pounds or writing a book. Systems, on the other hand, are about the process that leads to those outcomes. If you focus on the system, on showing up every day, even if the progress is slow, the results will eventually follow. The chapter ends with a powerful reminder: patience and consistency are the hallmarks of true mastery. The greatest achievements in life don't come from bursts of intense effort, but from steady, sustained progress over time. The most successful people are not the ones who work the hardest for a short period, but the ones who keep showing up day after day, week after week, even when the results are invisible. If you can commit to walking slowly but never backward, you'll eventually get to where you want to go. Chapter 12. The Cardinal Rule of Behavior Change. As James Clear moves into Chapter 12, he introduces what he calls the cardinal rule of behavior change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated, and what is immediately punished is avoided. This simple truth has profound implications for how we build and sustain habits, both good and bad. The chapter explores why immediate rewards are so powerful, how to use them to reinforce positive behaviors, and why we often struggle to stick with good habits that have long-term rewards but lack short-term gratification. Clear opens with a fascinating look into human psychology. He explains that the human brain is wired to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed ones, a concept known as time inconsistency. Our ancestors evolved in an environment where immediate rewards, like food or safety, were crucial for survival. As a result, our brains are still biased toward actions that provide immediate gratification. In modern society, this can work against us when it comes to building good habits, which often have delayed rewards. Think about exercising, eating healthy, or saving money. The benefits of these behaviors take weeks, months, or even years to fully materialize. On the other hand, bad habits like overeating, watching TV, or spending impulsively provide instant pleasure, even though the long-term consequences are negative. This mismatch between immediate and delayed rewards explains why so many people struggle to stick with good habits. Even though we know that exercising will make us healthier or that saving money will provide financial security, these benefits are too far off in the future to motivate us in the present moment. As Clear puts it, our brains are more concerned with immediate satisfaction than future well-being. So how do we overcome this natural bias for instant gratification and build habits that provide long-term rewards? Clear's answer lies in making good habits immediately satisfying. He argues that if you can create a system of immediate rewards for your positive behaviors, you'll reinforce those habits and make them more likely to stick. This is the core idea behind the cardinal rule of behavior change. If a habit feels good in the moment, you're more likely to repeat it. But how do you create immediate rewards for habits that don't naturally offer them? Clear introduces a concept called reinforcement. Reinforcement is about adding an element of immediate satisfaction to a habit, even if the true reward is delayed. For example, if you're trying to develop a habit of exercising, the immediate reward might not be visible weight loss or improved fitness. Those benefits take time. But you can create a sense of immediate reward by tracking your workouts in a journal or using a fitness app that gives you a sense of accomplishment after each session. Every time you complete a workout, you get the small satisfaction of checking it off your list or seeing your progress, which reinforces the habit. Clear offers several practical strategies for adding immediate rewards to good habits. One of the simplest and most effective methods is habit tracking. Habit tracking is exactly what it sounds like. You keep a visual record of your progress, whether it's marking an X on a calendar for every day you stick to your habit or using a habit tracking app that logs your daily efforts. The satisfaction of seeing your progress accumulate over time creates a small but powerful reward that keeps you motivated to continue. Even if the long-term benefits of the habit are far off, the act of tracking provides an immediate sense of achievement. Clear shares the example of comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who used habit tracking to build his writing habit. Seinfeld committed to writing jokes every day, and each day he did, he marked a large red X on a wall calendar. His goal wasn't to write the perfect joke or complete a set. It was simply to not break the chain. The longer the chain of red X's became, the more motivated Seinfeld was to keep the streak alive. This simple visual cue provided an immediate reward for his effort, even though the true payoff, improving as a comedian, was far in the future. This is the power of habit tracking. It creates a sense of momentum and satisfaction that reinforces the behavior. But habit tracking isn't the only way to make good habits immediately satisfying. Clear also talks about using short-term rewards to motivate yourself. For example, let's say you're trying to save money but struggle with the delayed reward of financial security. To make the habit more satisfying in the present, you could set up a reward system where, for every week you stick to your savings plan, you treat yourself to a small indulgence, like going out for a coffee or watching a movie. The key is to ensure that the short-term reward doesn't undermine the long-term goal. For example, if your goal is to save money, the reward shouldn't be a shopping spree. Instead, it should be something small that gives you a sense of satisfaction without sabotaging your progress. Clear emphasizes that the reward doesn't have to be big or extravagant. In fact, small, consistent rewards are often more effective because they keep you engaged without creating dependency. The idea is to associate positive emotions with the habit itself, so that over time, the habit becomes intrinsically satisfying. The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to stick with it. But what about bad habits? If bad habits are so satisfying in the moment, how do we break free from them? Clear offers a solution. Make bad habits immediately unsatisfying. The same principles that apply to reinforcing good habits can be used in reverse to weaken bad ones. If you can create immediate negative consequences for your bad habits, you'll be less likely to repeat them. Clear shares an example of a strategy called habit contracts. A habit contract is a formal agreement you make with yourself and others to hold you accountable for breaking a bad habit. The contract includes a specific consequence if you fail to meet your goal. For instance, you could write a contract stating that if you fail to stick to your workout routine, you'll have to pay a friend $100. By introducing an immediate negative consequence, you make the bad habit less appealing and create a sense of accountability. Knowing that there's a tangible cost to failure can be a powerful motivator to stay on track. One particularly interesting case that Clear highlights involves a man named Mitch who wanted to lose weight but struggled to stick with his diet and exercise plan. Mitch made a habit contract with two friends, agreeing that if he didn't lose a certain amount of weight by a specific date, he would have to pay $500 to each of them. To make the deal even more painful, Mitch's friends added a twist. If he didn't meet his goal, they would donate the money to a political cause he strongly opposed. This created a situation where the immediate punishment for failing was so unpleasant that Mitch was highly motivated to stick to his plan. The habit contract introduced a sense of urgency and accountability that kept him on track. Clear explains that bad habits thrive on immediate gratification, so the goal is to flip the script by attaching immediate costs to those behaviors. This can be done in a variety of ways. For example, if you're trying to cut back on social media usage, You could install an app that limits your screen time and sends notifications when you've reached your daily limit. If you exceed the limit, you could introduce a consequence, like donating to a charity or doing an extra household chore. The point is to make the bad habit more painful in the moment, so that your brain begins to associate it with negative outcomes rather than positive ones. Clear closes the chapter with a powerful reminder. Habits are a feedback loop. The more immediate satisfaction we get from a behavior, the more likely we are to repeat it. But this loop works both ways. If a behavior becomes immediately unsatisfying, we're less likely to engage in it. The key to building lasting habits is to manipulate the feedback loop in your favor. Make good habits satisfying and bad habits unsatisfying, and you'll create a system that reinforces positive behaviors and discourages negative ones. Chapter 13. How to keep your habits on track. In Chapter 13 of Atomic Habits, James Clear turns his attention to a critical part of the habit-building process: how to stay consistent and keep your habits on track over the long term. While the early stages of forming a habit can feel exciting, the real challenge comes when life inevitably throws curveballs your way. The trick, Clear explains, is not about being perfect. It's about how you handle the moments when your habits break down. Clear starts by addressing an important reality: you will mess up. No matter how committed you are to building a new habit, there will be times when you fall off track. Life gets busy, unexpected challenges arise, or your motivation wanes. But the key to long-term success isn't avoiding these slip-ups entirely. It's learning how to recover from them quickly. As Clear puts it, missing once is an accident, but missing twice is the start of a new habit. The faster you get back on track, the less damage a slip-up will do to your progress. Let's imagine you've committed to going for a run every morning, and for a few weeks, you're doing great. But then one morning, you oversleep. Maybe the night before was rough, or you're feeling a bit under the weather, so you skip the run. That's fine, it happens. But the real danger lies in what happens the next day. If you allow that one missed day to turn into 2, then 3, you're not just missing workouts, you're starting to form a new habit of skipping them. This is why Clear emphasizes the never miss twice rule. If you miss a day, don't dwell on it or beat yourself up. Just make sure to get back on track the next day. Clear introduces a concept called the Goldilocks rule to help us understand why staying on track is so important. The Goldilocks rule states that people are most motivated when they're working on tasks that are just on the edge of their current abilities. Not too easy, but not too hard either. If a task is too easy, you'll get bored. If it's too hard, you'll get discouraged. The sweet spot is the middle ground, where the challenge is just enough to keep you engaged without overwhelming you. This is true for habits as well. If you're constantly pushing yourself too far beyond your current abilities, you're more likely to burn out and quit. But if your habits are too easy, you'll lose interest and stop caring. The key, Clear explains, is to find the right balance. You need habits that are challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that you can't sustain them. This is why it's important to adjust your habits over time. As you improve, you can gradually increase the difficulty of the habit, but always make sure it remains within the Goldilocks zone. Clear illustrates this with an example from his own life. When he first started working out, he didn't jump straight into heavy weightlifting. Instead, he started small, just a few minutes of exercise each day. As his strength and stamina improved, he gradually increased the intensity of his workouts. This slow and steady progression kept him engaged without overwhelming him. By staying within his Goldilocks zone, Clear was able to build a sustainable exercise habit that lasted for years. This brings us to another powerful tool for staying on track: habit tracking. We've touched on this earlier, but in this chapter, Clear dives deeper into why tracking your habits is so effective. When you track your habits, whether it's by marking an X on a calendar, using a habit tracking app, or keeping a simple journal, you create a visual cue that reinforces your progress. Every time you check off a day, you get a small sense of satisfaction that motivates you to keep going. This is the power of momentum. Once you see a streak of success, you'll be more motivated to continue because you don't want to break the chain. Clear shares the story of a man named Benjamin Franklin, who was known for his habit of tracking his virtues. Franklin created a system where he would keep a daily record of his behavior, noting each time he succeeded or failed to live up to his values. This system of accountability helped him stay focused on self-improvement and keep his habits on track. While Franklin's method was complex, Clear emphasizes that your system doesn't need to be. Even something as simple as checking off days on a calendar can be enough to reinforce your habits and keep you moving forward. But what happens when you inevitably slip up? Clear offers a critical piece of advice. Don't focus on perfection, focus on progress. It's easy to get discouraged when you miss a day or fall short of your goals, but the key is to recognize that consistency is more important than perfection. No one is perfect, and trying to maintain a perfect streak is unrealistic. Instead, focus on building a pattern of consistency over time. A single slip-up doesn't ruin your progress. As long as you get back on track quickly, you're still moving forward. Clear also introduces a concept called identity-based habits. We've touched on this idea in earlier chapters, but here he expands on why it's so crucial for keeping your habits on track. Identity-based habits are habits that align with the person you want to become. For example, if you want to be a fit person, the habit of exercising regularly isn't just about burning calories. It's about reinforcing the identity of being someone who prioritizes health and fitness. When you view your habits through the lens of identity, each action you take becomes a vote for the type of person you want to be. This shift in mindset is powerful because it takes the focus off of short-term results and puts it on long-term transformation. Instead of worrying about whether you've achieved a specific goal, like losing 10 pounds or running a marathon, you focus on the daily actions that reinforce your desired identity. Over time, as these actions accumulate, they shape your sense of self and make it easier to stay consistent. Clear gives the example of an author who wants to write a book. Instead of setting a goal to write 1,000 words every day, the author shifts their focus to becoming a person who writes consistently. Some days they might write 500 words, other days 1,500, but the important thing is that they show up and write. By focusing on the identity of being a writer, rather than the specific outcome of hitting a word count, the author is more likely to stay on track and ultimately finish the book. But what if life throws a major disruption your way? What if you go on vacation, get sick, or experience a big life change that throws off your routine? Clear acknowledges that these situations are inevitable, and they're often where people lose momentum. The key, he says, is to plan for failure. By anticipating obstacles and preparing for them in advance, you can minimize their impact on your habits. For example, if you're going on vacation and won't have access to your regular gym, plan a simple bodyweight workout you can do in your hotel room. If you're worried about getting off track with healthy eating during the holidays, prepare by deciding in advance which meals you'll indulge in and which ones you'll stick to your plan. By having a contingency plan in place, you're less likely to let a disruption turn into a complete derailment. Clear wraps up the chapter with a reminder that small wins matter. Every time you successfully complete a habit, no matter how small, you're reinforcing the identity you want to build. These small wins create a sense of momentum and make it easier to keep going, even when progress feels slow. He shares the story of a reader who wanted to build a habit of flossing. Instead of committing to flossing all of their teeth every night, they started with just one tooth. This ridiculously small habit seemed almost laughable, but it helped them build momentum. Once they had the habit of flossing one tooth established, it became easy to expand to flossing all of their teeth. The key was to start small and celebrate the small wins along the way. As we close this chapter, Clear leaves us with a powerful message. Consistency is the key to long-term success. Habits aren't built in a day, and they're not destroyed by a single slip-up. The most important thing is to keep showing up, even when life gets in the way. By focusing on progress, not perfection, and celebrating small wins along the way, you can keep your habits on track and continue moving forward, no matter what obstacles you face. Chapter 14: How to Bounce Back Quickly. When your habits break down. Life rarely goes according to plan. No matter how disciplined you are, how well you prepare, or how committed you feel, There will always be moments when your habits break down. You miss a workout, eat junk food when you promised yourself you wouldn't, or neglect your writing routine for days. In Chapter 14, James Clear addresses this inevitable reality. What matters most isn't avoiding failure altogether, but learning how to recover quickly when failure happens. Clear begins by explaining that resilience, not perfection, is the key to long-term success. Everyone makes mistakes, even the most successful people. What separates those who succeed from those who fall back into bad habits is how quickly they bounce back after failure. The goal is not to prevent slip-ups entirely. That's impossible. But to shorten the amount of time between when a habit breaks down and when you start again. This is what Clear refers to as the art of recovery. The first step in bouncing back from a broken habit is recognizing that missing once is not the end of the world. Too often, when we miss a day or fall off track, we beat ourselves up and fall into what Clear calls the all-or-nothing trap. This is the mindset that if you can't do something perfectly, there's no point in doing it at all. You missed a workout? Might as well give up on exercising this week. You ate a slice of cake? You've blown your diet, so why not have a cheat weekend? Clear argues that this kind of thinking is what derails most people. Instead of letting a single slip-up snowball into a complete collapse, the key is to forgive yourself quickly and get back on track immediately. Everyone slips up. It's how you respond that determines whether or not the habit survives. He uses a powerful analogy. Imagine you're driving and you take a wrong turn. You wouldn't just keep driving in the wrong direction, would you? No, you'd turn the car around and get back on the right path as soon as possible. The same applies to habits. When you make a mistake, don't keep heading in the wrong direction. Correct your course as quickly as possible. Clear shares the story of a man who made it a rule to never miss 2 days in a row. This simple rule was his safety net, his way of ensuring that a single missed workout, unhealthy meal, or skipped writing session didn't turn into a pattern. By committing to getting back on track the very next day, he prevented small slip-ups from spiraling into long-term failures. The principle behind this rule is powerful. It's not the first mistake that ruins your progress. It's the series of mistakes that follow when you let one slip-up turn into a downward spiral. One of the most effective ways to avoid this spiral is to plan for failure in advance. Clear encourages us to anticipate obstacles and have a recovery strategy in place for when things go wrong. Let's say you're trying to build a habit of running every morning, but you know that some days you'll be too tired or too busy to run your usual route. Instead of abandoning the habit altogether on those days, have a backup plan. Maybe on particularly busy days, you commit to running for just 5 minutes instead of your usual 30. By having this fallback option, you can maintain the habit even when life gets in the way. This way, you're still casting a vote for the identity of being a runner, even if it's a smaller vote than usual. Clear also emphasizes the importance of self-compassion when it comes to bouncing back. Too often, people are their own worst critics. When they mess up, they're quick to judge themselves harshly, which only makes it harder to get back on track. Research shows that people who practice self-compassion are more likely to recover from setbacks because they don't waste energy on self-blame. Instead, they acknowledge their mistake, forgive themselves, and move forward. Self-compassion doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook or making excuses. It means treating yourself with kindness and understanding, just as you would treat a friend who was going through the same struggle. Clear tells the story of a woman who was trying to build a habit of eating healthier. Every time she had a bad day and ate something unhealthy, she used to berate herself and spiral into negative self-talk. This would often lead to her abandoning her healthy eating plan altogether, feeling like she had blown it. But after learning about self-compassion, she started taking a different approach. Instead of beating herself up, she would acknowledge the mistake and remind herself that one slip-up didn't define her progress. This shift in mindset allowed her to bounce back more quickly, and over time, her healthy eating habits became more consistent. In addition to self-compassion, Clear introduces the concept of implementation intentions as a powerful tool for recovery. We've discussed implementation intentions in earlier chapters. They involve creating a specific plan for when, where, and how you will execute your habit. But here, Clear adds another layer to this strategy: implementation intentions for recovery. This means planning in advance what you will do when things go wrong. Instead of hoping for the best and being caught off guard by obstacles, you anticipate them and decide ahead of time how you'll respond. For example, let's say you're trying to build a habit of meditating every morning, but you know there will be days when you wake up late or feel rushed. Instead of abandoning the habit on those days, you could create an implementation intention like this. If I wake up late, I will meditate for 2 minutes instead of 10. By having this plan in place, you're prepared for the inevitable disruptions and can maintain the habit, even in a modified form. Clear shares another example from his own life. When he was building a habit of writing every day, he knew there would be days when he didn't feel inspired or had other commitments. Instead of aiming for perfection, he created a rule for himself. Even on his busiest days, he would write just 1 sentence. This simple rule ensured that he stayed in the habit of writing, even when life got hectic. The result? Over time, his writing habit became so ingrained that it felt strange not to write, even if it was just a single sentence. Clear's point is clear: small wins matter. When you recover quickly from a slip-up, even with a tiny action, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who doesn't give up. This is why flexibility is so important in habit building. You don't need to be rigid with your habits. What matters most is that you keep showing up, even if it's in a smaller way than usual. Every small action reinforces the habit and strengthens your commitment to the process. But what if you've completely fallen off track? What if it's been weeks or even months since you've stuck to your habit? Clear reminds us that it's never too late to start again. One of the most damaging myths about habit building is the idea that if you've failed once, you've failed forever. But the truth is, habits are flexible. Just because you've fallen off track doesn't mean you can't get back on. The key is to start small, just as you did when you first built the habit. Recommit to the process, take small steps, and focus on rebuilding the consistency you once had. Clear closes the chapter with a final reminder. Recovery is a skill. Just like building habits, learning how to recover from failure is something that takes practice. The more you practice bouncing back quickly, the easier it becomes. Over time, you'll develop the resilience to handle setbacks without letting them derail your progress. The goal is not to be perfect, but to become someone who is relentless in their pursuit of improvement, someone who, no matter how many times they fall down, always gets back up. Chapter 15. The truth about talent, when genes matter and when they don't. As we move deeper into Atomic Habits, James Clear addresses a question that often looms over the topic of habits. What role does talent play in habit formation? Are some people just naturally better at sticking to certain habits because of their genetics or inherent abilities? In Chapter 15, Clear tackles this head-on, exploring how genetics, talent, and natural inclinations interact with our habits. The truth, Clear explains, is that while genetics do play a role, they're far from being the whole story. What matters more is how we align our habits with our natural strengths and inclinations. To start, Clear acknowledges that not all habits are created equal for everyone. Some people might find it easier to develop certain habits because they have natural talents or predispositions that give them an advantage. For example, if you have a naturally athletic build and enjoy physical activity, you might find it easier to develop a habit of exercising regularly compared to someone who finds working out physically taxing or unenjoyable. Similarly, if you're naturally organized and detail-oriented, you might find it easier to stick to habits related to productivity or planning. Clear uses the analogy of a car's horsepower. Some people, because of their genetics or natural abilities, might be born with more horsepower in a particular area, whether it's physical strength, creativity, or mathematical reasoning. This means they can accelerate faster in those areas and achieve results more easily. But, as Clear emphasizes, having more horsepower doesn't guarantee success. Just because someone has natural talent doesn't mean they'll automatically be successful. It's how that horsepower is used and applied that makes the difference. This leads to a critical insight. The most successful people aren't always the most talented. They're the ones who find ways to align their habits with their natural strengths. Instead of fighting against your natural inclinations, Clear suggests finding habits that complement your strengths and interests. When your habits align with your inherent abilities, you'll not only be more likely to stick with them, but you'll also enjoy the process more. This alignment between your habits and your natural abilities is what Clear refers to as working in your Goldilocks zone. So how do you find your Goldilocks zone, the sweet spot where your habits match your abilities? Clear offers a simple but powerful strategy. Pay attention to what feels easy for you but difficult for others. This is where your natural talents lie. Think about areas where you've always excelled without too much effort, or activities that come naturally to you but seem to frustrate others. These are clues to the types of habits that will likely stick for you in the long term. For example, if you've always enjoyed writing and find it easy to express yourself through words, then building a daily writing habit might feel natural for you, even if it's challenging for others. On the other hand, if you struggle with math and find it mentally draining, trying to build a habit around complex mathematical analysis might feel like swimming upstream. Clear's advice here is clear. Don't waste time forcing yourself to build habits that are completely out of alignment with your strengths. Instead, focus on developing habits that leverage your natural abilities. But this doesn't mean you should avoid challenges or difficult tasks. Clear reminds us that growth happens when we push ourselves just outside our comfort zone. However, the key is to find the right balance. Your habits should be challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so difficult that they feel impossible. This is why it's important to recognize your strengths and use them as a foundation for habit building. When your habits are aligned with your strengths, you'll find that the challenges are more manageable and the rewards come more easily. Clear also explores the role of personality in habit formation. He explains that different people have different personality traits, and these traits can influence the types of habits they're more likely to stick with. For instance, if you're an extrovert, you might thrive on habits that involve social interaction, like joining a group workout class or networking regularly. On the other hand, if you're more introverted, you might prefer habits that allow for solitude and reflection, like journaling or reading. Understanding your personality can help you choose habits that feel natural and sustainable for you. To further illustrate this point, Clear introduces the concept of Big Five personality traits, a widely recognized model in psychology that breaks down personality into 5 dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Each of these traits can influence the types of habits you're drawn to and how easily you stick to them. For example, openness to experience. If you score high on this trait, you're likely to enjoy habits that involve creativity, exploration, and trying new things. You might thrive on habits like learning new skills, traveling, or engaging in artistic activities. Conscientiousness. People who score high on this trait tend to be organized, disciplined, and goal-oriented. They're likely to succeed in habits that involve structure, routine, and attention to detail, such as planning, budgeting, or setting long-term goals. Extroversion. Extroverts tend to enjoy habits that involve social interaction and external stimulation. They might thrive in group activities like team sports, social clubs, or collaborative projects. Agreeableness. If you score high on agreeableness, you're likely to enjoy habits that involve helping others and building positive relationships. You might be drawn to habits like volunteering, mentoring, or spending quality time with loved ones. Neuroticism. People who score high in neuroticism are often more sensitive to stress and emotional fluctuations. They may benefit from habits that help manage stress, like mindfulness, meditation, or exercise. Clear's message here is powerful. Your personality is not a limitation, it's a tool. By understanding your natural tendencies, you can tailor your habits to fit who you are, rather than trying to force yourself into a mold that doesn't suit you. When your habits align with your personality, they become easier to maintain, and you're more likely to see success. But what if you have goals or aspirations that don't align perfectly with your natural strengths? Clear acknowledges that there will be times when you need to build habits that don't come naturally to you. In these cases, the key is to find ways to make the habit more enjoyable or rewarding. This could mean pairing the habit with something you already enjoy, as we discussed earlier with temptation bundling, or finding an environment that makes the habit feel less like a chore. For example, if you struggle with exercising but love being outdoors, you might find that hiking or playing an outdoor sport feels more natural and enjoyable than going to the gym. If you're trying to build a habit of learning a new language but find the traditional methods boring, you could make it more fun by watching movies or TV shows in the language you're trying to learn. The goal is to find a way to tap into your natural interests and align them with the habit you want to build. Clear also emphasizes the importance of environment design in situations where your natural abilities or personality don't perfectly align with the habit. If you're trying to develop a habit that doesn't come naturally to you, adjusting your environment to remove distractions or add positive cues can make a big difference. This could mean setting up a dedicated space for a particular habit, surrounding yourself with people who support that behavior, or creating systems that make the habit easier to follow through on, even when it feels challenging. The chapter wraps up with a powerful reminder. You don't need to be the best at everything. Success doesn't come from trying to excel in every area or force yourself to develop habits that don't align with who you are. Instead, success comes from focusing on your strengths and building habits that allow you to use those strengths effectively. By aligning your habits with your natural talents and personality, you create a system where success feels almost effortless, and you're more likely to stick with your habits over the long term. Chapter 16: The Secret to Results That Last. As we near the conclusion of Atomic Habits, James Clear delves into one of the most powerful concepts of the entire book, the process of continuous improvement. In Chapter 16, Clear introduces us to the idea that building good habits is not a one-time event, it's a lifelong journey. The key to achieving lasting results lies in the ability to refine and improve your habits continuously over time, ensuring that you never plateau in your progress. Clear begins the chapter by emphasizing that habits are not a finish line to be crossed, but a lifestyle to be lived. Too often, people set a specific goal, like losing 20 pounds, writing a book, or saving a certain amount of money, and assume that once they reach that goal, the journey is over. But Clear argues that this mindset is flawed because it leads to temporary success. If you view habits as a tool for achieving short-term goals, you might stop once you reach those goals, which can lead to backsliding or regressing into old behaviors. To avoid this, Clear encourages us to adopt a mindset of continuous improvement, or what the Japanese call kaizen. Kaizen is the philosophy of making small, incremental improvements over time. It's not about making dramatic changes all at once, but about constantly looking for ways to improve by just 1%. These small changes may seem insignificant in the moment, but they compound over time, leading to extraordinary results. Clear provides the example of athletes who, after years of training, reach a point where they're already performing at a high level. At this stage, massive improvements are unlikely, but they can still look for small ways to refine their performance, whether it's adjusting their diet, tweaking their technique, or improving their mental game. These 1% improvements, when compounded over time, can make the difference between a good athlete and a great one. This principle of continuous improvement applies to all areas of life, not just athletics. Whether you're trying to improve your health, relationships, career, or personal development, the key is to keep refining your habits, even after you've achieved initial success. Once you've built a habit, don't stop there. Ask yourself, how can I make this habit even better? How can I improve just a little bit more each day? Clear introduces a powerful framework for continuous improvement. Habit optimization. Habit optimization is the process of taking a habit you've already built and making small adjustments to it over time to improve its efficiency or effectiveness. It's about finding ways to make your good habits even better. Clear explains that once a habit becomes automatic, it can be easy to get complacent and fall into a routine. But if you're constantly looking for ways to optimize your habits, you'll ensure that you're always improving. For example, let's say you've built the habit of exercising regularly, but you've hit a plateau in your fitness progress. Instead of just sticking to the same routine, You could start optimizing your workouts by experimenting with different types of exercises, adjusting your nutrition, or focusing on your recovery strategies. These small changes can reignite your progress and prevent stagnation. Clear also introduces the concept of habit tracking as a tool for optimization. We've already discussed how tracking your habits can help you stay consistent, but in this chapter, Clear emphasizes how habit tracking can also be used to identify areas for improvement. By keeping track of your progress over time, you can start to notice patterns, days when you're more productive, times when you're more likely to stick to your habits, or circumstances that lead to slip-ups. This data can be incredibly valuable because it allows you to make informed decisions about how to tweak your habits for better results. For instance, if you're tracking your sleep and notice that you're consistently getting less rest on nights when you use your phone right before bed, you can adjust your bedtime routine to include a phone-free hour before sleep. Similarly, if you're tracking your workouts and notice that your energy levels are higher in the afternoon, you might decide to shift your exercise routine from morning to afternoon to take advantage of that natural energy boost. Clear provides another powerful tool for optimization: reviewing and reflecting on your habits regularly. He recommends setting aside time every few months to review your habits and assess how well they're serving you. Are you still making progress? Have you plateaued? Are there any areas where you could improve or make your habits more enjoyable? This process of reflection is key to ensuring that your habits continue to evolve and improve over time. Clear uses the example of businesses that conduct quarterly reviews to assess their performance and adjust their strategies. Just like a business, you should conduct regular reviews of your own life, examining your habits and looking for ways to optimize them. This could involve asking yourself questions like, what's working well right now? Where am I struggling? What small adjustments could I make to improve my habits? Are there any new habits I want to introduce? By regularly reviewing your habits, you'll ensure that you stay on the path of continuous improvement and avoid getting stuck in a rut. But what if you're happy with your progress and feel like you've reached a level of success you're content with? Clear reminds us that there's always room for improvement, but that doesn't mean you need to constantly strive for more. Sometimes, optimizing a habit might simply mean maintaining it in a way that feels sustainable and enjoyable for you. The key is to avoid complacency and continue seeking ways to make small improvements, even if those improvements are more about quality of life than achieving big, flashy results. Clear also touches on the importance of finding joy in the process of continuous improvement. Too often, people focus solely on the outcome, whether it's losing weight, earning more money, or achieving a specific goal, and they miss the opportunity to enjoy the journey itself. But Clear argues that the real secret to lasting success is learning to enjoy the process of refining and optimizing your habits. When you find joy in the small, incremental improvements, you're more likely to stick with your habits long-term, because the process itself becomes rewarding. To drive this point home, Clear shares the story of a Japanese company called Toyota, which became famous for its practice of Kaizen, continuous improvement. Toyota encouraged every employee, from factory workers to executives, to constantly look for ways to improve their processes, no matter how small. Over time, this culture of continuous improvement led Toyota to become one of the most successful and efficient companies in the world. The lesson here is clear. Success doesn't come from making big leaps. It comes from making small improvements, day after day. Clear concludes the chapter by encouraging us to adopt the mindset of a craftsman, someone who is constantly refining their skills and seeking to master their craft. A craftsman doesn't settle for good enough. They take pride in their work and are always looking for ways to improve, no matter how skilled they become. This mindset of continuous improvement is the key to building habits that last for a lifetime, rather than habits that fade once a goal is reached. Chapter 17. How accountability can transform your habits. In Chapter 17 of Atomic Habits, James Clear introduces one of the most powerful yet often overlooked tools for building and maintaining habits: accountability. While we may think of habit building as a solo journey, Clear argues that involving others in your process can significantly increase your chances of success. By creating accountability systems, You introduce external pressure that can help you stay on track, even when your motivation dips. Clear starts by explaining why social accountability is such a powerful motivator. Humans are social creatures, and we care deeply about how others perceive us. We don't want to let others down, especially when we've made a public commitment. This is why accountability, whether it comes from a friend, family member, colleague, or a larger community, can be a game changer in habit building. When you involve others in your goals, you create a sense of external pressure to follow through. Clear shares an example of this through the use of accountability partners. These are individuals who you trust to help you stay on track by checking in on your progress. Let's say you're trying to build the habit of exercising every morning. If you know your accountability partner will be asking you whether you went for that run, you'll feel a stronger sense of obligation to follow through. The simple fact that someone else is paying attention to your actions creates an added layer of motivation. This external check-in can often be the difference between skipping your workout and lacing up your shoes. But accountability doesn't have to stop with a single person. Clear introduces the idea of accountability groups, a community of people who are working towards similar goals and provide support and encouragement to one another. Whether it's a book club, a workout group, or a professional network, the collective energy of the group can help push everyone to succeed. When you know that others are facing the same challenges as you, it becomes easier to stay committed because you feel like part of something bigger than yourself. Clear gives the example of Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, as one of the most successful accountability groups in the world. AA is built on the idea that people struggling with addiction need the support of a community to stay sober. The regular meetings, sponsor relationships, and the sense of shared purpose create a powerful accountability system that helps millions of people stay on track with their sobriety goals. This is the power of community. It provides a support system that reinforces positive behavior, even when individual motivation wavers. But Clear doesn't just stop at accountability groups. He also explores the concept of public accountability, the idea that making a public commitment to a goal increases the pressure to follow through. This is why many people announce their goals on social media or to friends and family. The more public the commitment, the higher the stakes. If you tell everyone at work that you're going to quit smoking, there's now an added layer of pressure to succeed because you don't want to be seen as someone who breaks their promises. Clear also introduces a more formal version of accountability: habit contracts. A habit contract is an agreement you make with yourself and one or more accountability partners. The contract clearly outlines the specific habits you want to build, the steps you'll take to achieve them, and the consequences if you fail to follow through. By formalizing the commitment, you add a sense of seriousness to your goals. It's no longer just a vague idea in your head. It's a written contract with real stakes. To illustrate the power of habit contracts, Clear shares the story of a man named Scott, who wanted to lose weight and improve his health. Scott made a habit contract with his wife and personal trainer, agreeing to stick to his exercise and nutrition plan for 90 days. If he failed to meet his goals, he would owe his trainer $1,000. The financial penalty was significant enough to keep Scott motivated, and the accountability of having both his wife and trainer involved meant he couldn't easily back out. Scott successfully stuck to his plan, largely because of the accountability structure he'd put in place. Clear explains that the key to a successful habit contract is the immediate consequence of failing to meet your commitment. The consequences don't have to be financial. They just need to be meaningful enough to push you to stay on track. For some, the thought of disappointing a loved one might be enough of a motivator, while others might need a more tangible penalty, like donating money to a cause they don't support. The point is to introduce a consequence that makes failing to meet your habit uncomfortable, so you're more likely to follow through. Clear then touches on the psychological power of loss aversion, the idea that people are more motivated by the fear of losing something than by the desire to gain something. Studies have shown that the pain of losing $100 feels more intense than the pleasure of gaining $100. This insight can be used to your advantage when designing accountability systems. By creating a consequence that involves losing something you value, whether it's money, time, or reputation, You leverage the brain's natural aversion to loss to keep yourself on track. However, Clear emphasizes that accountability is not just about punishment or consequences. It's also about positive reinforcement. When you succeed in sticking to your habits, sharing your progress with an accountability partner or group can provide a sense of accomplishment and validation. This positive reinforcement helps solidify the habit because you're not only avoiding negative consequences, you're also receiving encouragement and praise for your efforts. One of the most important points Clear makes in this chapter is that accountability isn't just about external pressure. It's about creating a support system that helps you succeed. The people you choose to hold you accountable should want you to succeed and be genuinely invested in your progress. They should provide both encouragement when things are going well and gentle reminders or consequences when you fall off track. Clear also highlights that the best accountability systems are ones that match your personality and preferences. For some, a formal habit contract with clear consequences might be the perfect motivator, while others might prefer the more informal accountability of a supportive friend or group. The key is to find a system that works for you and helps you stay committed to your habits in a way that feels natural and sustainable. In the closing section of the chapter, Clear offers a final, empowering insight. When you combine internal commitment with external accountability, you create a powerful force for change. By taking ownership of your goals and involving others in your journey, you significantly increase your chances of success. Accountability transforms your habits from something you're doing alone into a shared mission, one where you have the support, encouragement, and pressure needed to keep going, even when the road gets tough. Chapter 18. The truth about small improvements and why they make the biggest difference. In this final chapter of Atomic Habits, James Clear focuses on what he calls advanced tactics, the small, often overlooked strategies that separate high achievers from the rest. While much of the book has been about understanding and implementing the fundamentals of habit building, this chapter digs deeper into the fine-tuning of habits, the small improvements that, over time, make the biggest difference. This is where Clear introduces the concept of marginal gains and shows how focusing on continuous improvement, even in the smallest areas, can lead to extraordinary results. Clear begins by reminding us of an important truth. It's easy to overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. We often think that success or failure comes from one big decision or one moment of brilliance, but the reality is that it's the small, consistent actions we take every day that lead to lasting change. Success is rarely the result of a dramatic leap forward. It's more often the result of tiny gains made over time. To illustrate this point, Clear shares a famous example from the world of sports, the British cycling team. For years, British cyclists had been stuck in mediocrity. They hadn't won a single Tour de France, and their Olympic performance was lackluster. But in 2003, a new performance director, Sir Dave Brailsford, was hired with one simple but revolutionary idea: the philosophy of the aggregation of marginal gains. This idea was based on the belief that if you could make tiny improvements in every area related to cycling, whether it was the nutrition of the riders, the design of their bikes, or even the way they wash their hands, you could add up these small gains to create a huge overall improvement. Brailsford's team made small tweaks in hundreds of areas, from optimizing the athletes' sleep environments to improving the aerodynamics of their uniforms. At first, the changes seemed insignificant. Adjustments to the seat position, the use of slightly different massage gels, and other seemingly trivial details. But the results were remarkable. In 2008, the British cycling team dominated the Beijing Olympics, winning 60% of the gold medals available in track cycling. In 2012, they repeated their success in London. And in 2012, British cyclist Bradley Wiggins became the first Brit to win the Tour de France, followed by several more victories from other British cyclists in the years that followed. Clear emphasizes that the success of the British cycling team wasn't the result of one big breakthrough. It was the accumulation of many small improvements, each one contributing to the overall success of the team. This is the essence of marginal gains. When you make small improvements in many areas, the cumulative effect can be enormous. Clear applies this principle to habits. He explains that small improvements in your daily habits can compound into remarkable results over time. If you can get just 1% better at something each day, those tiny improvements will add up and create massive changes in the long run. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require radical shifts or extreme effort. Instead, it's about focusing on making tiny, incremental changes that are so small they almost seem insignificant, until they're not. This is why consistency is so important. When you focus on small improvements and commit to doing them consistently over time, you build momentum. Each small gain reinforces the next, and over time, you experience the compounding effect of your efforts. Just like compound interest in finance, the benefits of small improvements in habits multiply over time. Clear explains that the compounding effect works both ways, positively and negatively. If you make small improvements every day, those improvements will compound and lead to significant positive outcomes. But if you let small negative habits creep in, those will also compound and lead to negative outcomes. This is why it's so important to pay attention to the small details in your life. The tiny choices you make every day, whether it's eating a healthy meal or skipping a workout, may not seem important in the moment, but over time, they add up. Clear also dives into the idea that high achievers are often those who pay attention to the small details that others overlook. While everyone else is focused on the big picture, high achievers are constantly looking for ways to make tiny improvements that will give them an edge. This is why athletes obsess over things like their sleep patterns, their recovery routines, or the way they fuel their bodies. These small details may not seem like much on their own, but when combined, they can make a huge difference in performance. This same principle can be applied to any area of life. Whether you're trying to improve your health, advance in your career, or strengthen your relationships, the small habits you practice each day matter more than any single big decision you make. Clear encourages us to think about where we can make small improvements in our own lives. What tiny changes can you make today that, if practiced consistently, will lead to massive gains in the future? Clear then introduces a powerful strategy for staying on track with your small improvements: measurement and feedback. He explains that if you want to get better at something, you need to measure your progress and get feedback on how you're doing. This is why athletes and professionals often use coaches. They provide objective feedback and help identify areas for improvement. Clear emphasizes that you can't improve what you don't measure. By tracking your habits and measuring your progress, you can identify where you're improving and where you still need to make adjustments. But Clear also cautions against the trap of over-measuring. While measurement is important, he explains that some people get so obsessed with tracking every little detail that they lose sight of the bigger picture. The goal is not to create a rigid, overly complex system of tracking every habit in your life. It's to focus on the most important habits that will drive your success and measure those. He provides a simple framework for effective habit measurement. Measure what matters. Instead of tracking every habit, focus on the key areas that will make the biggest difference. For example, if you're trying to improve your fitness, you might track your workout consistency, your nutrition, and your recovery, rather than obsessing over every possible metric. The key is to track enough to keep yourself accountable and see progress, but not so much that you become bogged down in unnecessary details. Clear closes this chapter with a powerful reminder: the process of improvement never ends. The most successful people are those who embrace the idea of continuous improvement and never stop looking for ways to get just a little bit better each day. Whether it's refining their habits, optimizing their systems, or seeking feedback, high achievers are always in pursuit of growth. This is the secret to lasting success. It's not about achieving a goal and stopping. It's about creating a lifestyle of continuous improvement. Clear's final message is one of hope and empowerment. Anyone can improve, no matter where they start. You don't need to be born with exceptional talent, and you don't need to make radical changes overnight. All you need is a commitment to small, daily improvements, and the belief that over time, those small changes will add up to something extraordinary. The book concludes with a call to action: start today. Whether you're at the beginning of your habit-building journey or you've already made progress, there's always room to improve. The power of habits is within your reach. You just need to take that first step, no matter how small, and keep moving forward.